Good evening. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about searching for and using primary sources in religious writing. Now, when I was doing my undergraduate, I was going to a religiously affiliated university, and so every one of us had to take a certain number of theology and religion courses, as well as a certain number of philosophy courses. And if you spent any time in a philosophy department, you know that religion is a subject that often crosses over. So this is something that, even though we're looking at a course taken from a particular department, the principles will apply in many others where you're dealing with original writings on a topic, whether it happens to be in a religious vein or if it is something more secular. So we are going to be looking at an assignment from the Biblical Studies course, and one of the things I'd like to always invite you to do is to take a look at what might be off in a side. So I'm going to tell you that we're doing a assignment from the Biblical Studies program, BIHO 432. And so tell me if you can spot the error on this slide. And if you're thinking, oh, that first bullet point, yep. So the reason I say this is that it is very easy when you are working on something and working at it with a deadline in mind. It's very easy to miss something like that. And so it is a good reminder for all of us to go ahead and proofread and look at every slide, every sentence. Doesn't have to be a long time, but if you're looking through, specifically looking for errors, you're more likely to find them. And in this case, if you're taking the course, you'd notice, hey, I'm taking an upper division undergraduate course, not a lower division one. So with that, let me see if you can find the second error on this slide. You're looking for something that doesn't belong, and this works on several levels. One thing you might be doing is just looking for ideas that don't make sense in a paragraph, something that doesn't align with a topic sentence, and then you either have to remove it, move it to a paragraph where it does make sense, or adjust a topic sentence so it makes sense logically to have that there. Now, here you can see internal group. That doesn't look like it has anything to do with the topic of citing primary sources, and you'd be right. So that is, in fact, something from yesterday's webinar. So again, just because you find one error doesn't mean you want to just stop there. You want to make sure that you are proactively looking for things that are factual errors, opportunities to improve, things that might be perhaps a little sloppy, especially if you're writing late at night. And this is also something where if you put it in front of someone else who had not read the text before or not looked at the slides before, then you would be likely to hear back from them saying, hey, I'm not sure why this is mentioned on the slide outline. It doesn't come up anywhere else. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at our focus here. And again, we want to be looking as we go for errors. And if you're thinking, hold on, I have seen that before. I specifically remember seeing that being an error there. Then great spotting. Let us go ahead, fix that, and move on. Okay, so we're looking at BIHO 432, the story of Christian spirituality, and this is specifically the week 5 modern Christian spirituality essay. Now we could start with just an overview looking at this, and we see that begins with a section on the purpose, which we might understand as being the prelude of sorts of framing the idea of, oh, yes, this is a broader purpose of what we're trying to do, and separate that from the instructions, which is a precise list of tasks and requirements to check off. For example, 500 to 700 words, that's roughly 2 to 3 full pages worth of text. So your paper shouldn't be conspicuously less than 2 pages of content, And you should also be not exceeding 3 full pages of content. So start with doing exactly what is required and then see what space is available, and that will give you an idea about the level of detail and depth to go into. Okay, continuing on here. Let's break that down. So if we start with the assignment preamble here, and we can see that, all right, to evaluate themes of classical spiritual literature and consider how they connect to contemporary spiritual practice. So it's not just evaluate them. There's also the connection to the current context. So this would be synthesis, where you're applying the ideas to today. And so we see that the instructions begin with this note: after reading and thinking about the course materials for the week, write a 500 to 700 word paper formatted using APA guidelines that focuses on a theme or subject that ties together 2 or more of the assigned primary sources for the week. And after that overarching heading, we have a list of specific requirements: at least 1 European source, at least 1 American source. You can include a reflection. Usually when you may include, you want to take that as a strong suggestion saying, hey, you should do that. Make connections between the text and other spiritual writings, or integrate thought from other areas of knowledge or experience. So there's a number of options laid out to you for how to do that, and that you should be citing the primary text, so primary sources, appropriately to support your argument and provide evidence for your claims, and also use secondary sources potentially for background information. And then we see a list of elements that the instructor wants to see: an introduction, a thesis statement, a clear thesis statement, I should say, which means you don't want to have it buried in the middle of a paragraph. It should be first sentence or last sentence in the paragraph, supporting paragraphs to spell out your argument, and a conclusion. Okay, fair enough. And if we look at the rubric, it is essentially saying, hey, all of those things. Want to call your attention to a couple things here. So we have exhibits a high level of interdisciplinary skill and spiritual maturity. So that is one of those things where when you are showing a high level of interdisciplinary skill, that's probably going to involve the secondary sources that you are suggested or strongly suggested to be citing. Now, relates material to other areas of knowledge and practice. That's going to include applying to a current contemporary life situation, supporting examples, reference to personal experiences, and context. And context is probably going to involve secondary sources. And last thing, see, accuracy, depth of comprehension, broad and proper reliance on primary sources. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is referring to in a little bit. All right. So how do you identify primary sources? Well, it's going to depend on the specific genre. So for example, if we're looking at humanities, that's often working with creative works, say a novel or a play, things like diaries, interviews where people voice their thoughts, news footage, maps, as opposed to a book about someone written by a different author. Most journal articles being secondary sources. Textbooks might be secondary, might be tertiary, depending on the subject. And then you can see in the sciences and social sciences, primary sources where you're gathering original data. Now, from that, we don't have religion on that particular boundary, but if you're taking this course, you might differentiate between, for example, the Pauline letters, which are letters by the Apostle Paul, a documented historic figure, who wrote these letters to different communities, like letter to the Corinthians, that's to people in the city of Corinth. And so we have this connection between the author and their original words. Now, contrast that to a commentary on a letter by Paul, written by another author, explaining what it is and probably referring to other sources as well to give context and explain. So while religion isn't on this chart, if we look at the distance from the original voice is primary source, and people commenting, writing about it, that's going to be a secondary source. And something that is using those secondary sources without looking at the primary sources would be a tertiary source. Now, we could also break it down with this graphic. And so we have here our way of looking at it through more of a scientific vocabulary lens. And we see, okay, raw data or original sources of information before it has been analyzed. So we can also take a look at the course readings. Now, for this specific assignment, we have in the module, we have a breakdown of, secondary source, the text thirsty for God, as opposed to primary sources where we have things that have been reprinted. And for example, these are some of the writings of Thérèse of Lisieux, or the theological writings and the hymns of John and Charles Wesley, sermon by the preacher Jonathan Edwards, and others. And so these are people's direct writings that give us insights into their beliefs and the theologies that they were promoting. And we separate that again from a textbook that is writing about those other things. So in this case, the assignment divides it pretty well. And we have these citations here where, with minor modifications, we can adapt those to APA style. So as an example, let's go ahead and take these examples here for American Frontier Spirituality. And so one of the questions you might have is, what is different about those when you are marking it as a reference in APA style? Well, if we look at this, Jonathan Edwards, well, that's not in the last name initial that we have down here, which we'd want in APA style. So this would be changed to Edwards, comma, J, period. And then we have the name of the editor, we have the title, the page range, and then the publisher. Great. Now here, in this book here, we don't have information about who edited this. Now, if you were to go ahead and do a search for that in Lectures on Revivals of Religion, we see that this is a book by Charles Finney. So even though it is presented here as if there was an editor information, then we know from looking at it that, that was a book. This is an essay within it. So in APA style, what you would do is you would, because this is from a single author volume, meaning no one else is contributing to it or writing chapters separately. So we would get rid of all this, and we would have last name, first initial, publication year, the title. We'd get rid of the page range because it's a citation for the whole book, and then we keep the publisher there. You would probably be accessing this electronically because it's a relatively uncommon book, and so you'd probably have a URL to the electronic resource that you got that from, for example, Google Books. So let's do a similar dive and look at the Palmer source. So this is one where we have the book, The Way of Holiness with Notes by the Way by Palmer. All right, so what happens if we just do a search for that title? So by Phoebe Palmer, okay, great. And looking at this, we see 1849. Now that is showing the 1845 edition. We want 1849. We add this, and so we have a link to an electronic version of it. This is a digitized copy of the book. And if we scroll down till we get to the title page, we find that's the 1845 edition. So let's go ahead and take a look in WorldCat. So WorldCat is an online library database And in this case, we're looking to see, is there a edition of this book from 1849, or is that perhaps a typo in the syllabus? Well, we'll look at print books, and we'll go ahead and you can limit this to 1849. And we see, there was a 1849 edition here. Okay, and Phoebe Palmer is the sole author. Okay, so that's helpful. So even though some of the information may have suggested to us it was in an edited volume, after looking at it, we see, hold on, we wouldn't include the chapter information, we wouldn't include the word in, and we wouldn't include the page range. So it'll be Palmer, P, 1849, The Way of Holiness with notes. And then you might check the title and make sure that you had the whole title. And so this part would be added here into that. And then the publisher. All right, last one, we'll do the Rausch and Bush piece. Now you could open this up in another window and take a look at this. And so we're seeing it out of context without all that front matter. So that's a case where you might want to go ahead and just grab that book title and go and do a search to see what comes up there. And again, you can add in WorldCat into your search string to bring up additional results. Now in our reading list here, we have 1910 listed, so we want the 1910 edition, not this 1978 reprint that is showing up here. So we're going to go ahead and we'll go to WorldCat, and we see, okay, this seems to be a single author work. So going back to this, we see, even though this is citing this specific chapter, how this would appear in our APA reference list would be just with the author, last name, initial, publication year, with the title there, and no page range, and then the name of the publisher. Now, the fact that it's a primary source doesn't matter here versus a secondary source for having an author date citation. Now, if it was a edited compilation of different writings by multiple authors in one volume, which is the case for this first source, then you would have the specific items there in your reference. So you'd have the name of the book chapter. Now, if we look at this example here, so that this is the entry on Jonathan Edwards. Now, we have both this introductory short essay with 3 paragraphs, and then we have the original text, A New Apprehension of Christ. So the actual chapter is A New Apprehension of Christ. That's the title. And so that information will get inserted into the reference here. So over here, we would have the title of the chapter going right after 1999, close parentheses, period. So that is something about how you might be identifying the reference information. Well, let's go ahead and take a look back at our slide decks now. So we've looked at how to sort the course readings, but what if you go outside? And a good place to start is the Historical and Systematic Theology database that the ACU library maintains. And so if we look at that, we can see that there are various resources, but ATLA is primarily going to be secondary and tertiary literature. And we have things like New Testament abstracts, Old Testament abstracts. So that is referring to articles writing about those respective parts of the Bible. But you might have original texts in the religion philosophy collection that you are citing, or in the case of the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, then you would be dealing with a lot of primary sources. So let's say that you were delving into the religion and philosophy collection here. So looking through this, we see that we have a search database here. Now, we typed in a letter to the Corinthians. You'd probably want first letter of Corinthians if that was the specific one you're looking for. And so this is a title, The Sermon as Biblical Commentary, in the case of Newman's parochial and plain sermons and Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. So this is discussing at least two different secondary sources, because we're referring to Newman's sermons by that title and Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. So it's probably a more than three sources here, because for that to be plural, we need at least two. And if we look at that, Newman had a lot of sermons on that would fit into those topics. So we're looking at something that's discussing primary sources, these sermons by Newman and Paul's first letter to Corinthians. So that is going to be secondary literature. So it's commenting on those original sources or primary sources. Now, here we have the first letter to the Corinthians. And if we look at it, the book of Corinthians that we call first letter to the Corinthians is longer than 3 pages. So the fact that this has the same title does not mean it's a primary source. This is a commentary about the first letter to the Corinthians. And we see from the abstract that it's reviewing a book by that name. It is not about, it is not Paul's original text. Okay, now let's say we are looking and you search primary source. Well, that's going to bring up some stuff here. And we see that we have, news, who are the Goths, critique of Reformed. So these are mentioning the word or the term primary source, but this is probably not what we're looking for. So the question now comes up, okay, primary source documents. Let's say you search for Christianity, and we're just doing a Google source here. And you'll see that the Gale, and Gale is a big educational publisher, they have a section on religion and mythology. This is promoting their books, but they do have a primary sources archive. And the primary sources archive includes Religions of America. So if you're looking for primary sources by American theologians, there's a lot of stuff in there that you might be interested in. And there are other resources for continental or European theologians as well. All right, so let's now head back to our slide deck. And let's talk about the question for outline and drafting, because this is a shorter assignment. It is only going to be roughly 2 to 3 pages, and we've got a bunch of things to do. And so a great place to start is by finding out what you have to do. And the best way to do that is to start with the instructions. So let's go grab a copy of our APA course paper template, and let's start filling some things out. And this is something where if you are creating it as you're reading the instructions, you can, in essence, create a requirements list that you will then take into your readings. And then when you see something that meets the requirement amongst your readings, you can add it here and take notes on what you'll fill in. All right, so we're going to go ahead, and I have a blank copy of our APA course paper template pulled up, and we're going to go ahead and add some material here. So we'll start by just taking the instructions here from the slides or from the assignment page and pasting them in here. And if we do this with italics, it'll be easier to spot what is a instruction and what is the text that you are adding in. And so here, let's say we're looking at this and you decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and draw on one of those primary sources. So let me take a look at the syllabus here. And so looking at the readings for the week, we see, oh, a couple primary sources, like, oh, you know what? I like Jonathan Edwards. Let's go ahead and add that source here. So, all right, heading back to our references here, you can start by just pasting what is present there. And we have some changes we need to make immediately. We need to take out the bulleting. We want to add the hanging indent from APA style. So I've opened up this styles pane by clicking on styles pane here. And I'm going to apply the style APA reference. And then we'll take out some stuff that does not belong here, but came from the copy and paste. So Jonathan Edwards, we're going to replace that with Edwards, comma, J. And then we need the title of this essay. And so if we look back at the piece here, so we have Jonathan Edwards, so that's the entry about him, the short 3-paragraph biography. But the actual letter is a new apprehension of Christ. So we want to go ahead and put that into our references. Now, this is something I've seen in many a draft. That is not going after the editor, that's going after the author of this. And it is kind of a chapter insertion in its own self. So a new apprehension of Christ in J.R. Tyson, ed. Invitation to Christian Spirituality, an ecumenical anthology. And then here we are. And so you'd cite this as Edwards 1999. Now that's an American source, so we can cross that off here. And so we need a European source in our discussion. Well, as it happens, this assignment and the assignments for the week have given us a set of readings that would be helpful to have here. So when we're looking at these readings here, we have the Wesleys, who were born in the UK, and although they did a lot of work in North America, they are definitely European. And so if we're to look at, say, an account of Christian perfection by John Wesley, so this is kind of a biographical work by him. And so an account of Christian perfection, and we have, this is published online. So if you open this up, we have this link here. So we'll make sure to grab that. And now we need to head back to Word, and we're going to set this up. So Wesley will be our European source. And so we'll start by pasting that URL, and then we'll go back to the course website and look at what's listed here. So with Wesley, no date, okay. Now there are two Wesleys here writing, so you need to distinguish between John and Charles. So make sure you have that initial. And then our title here is going to be an account of Christian perfection. And then we need to name the resource that it's appearing in. And so this is on the CCAL website. And if you go to the website, it will tell you who or what CCL is. That's a Christian Classics. So that Christian Classics Ethereal Library, this is our host here. So we will add that information to our Word document. So the title here is going to be An Account of Christian Perfection. This is really the publisher or platform, the website that it's on. And so we just list that, not italicized. The title of the work is here. And in this case, the corollary or parallel is that. Okay, so you would cite this as Wesley, N period, D period. This one is Edwards, 1999. If you were citing the works by both Wesley brothers, you would then use J. Wesley and C. Wesley in your citations so the reader could see which one was which. Okay, so looking at the things here, we see need to find a theme or subject that ties them together, and we need to make sure we have some of these requirements here. And you can pick one, but probably not all of these things because we only have 2 or 3 pages here. But you might have some text like, and whatever it is, you want to ground it in the different authors you're referring to. And while in more colloquial speech and writing, we would spell out Charles Wesley. In APA style, we just need the C so we can tell that that's not John Wesley. So it would be C. Wesley, not Charles Wesley. All right, cite the primary text appropriately to support and provide evidence for your claims. So, for example, you might have a sentence such as, and then have a quote, whatever that is. And of course, you need to follow it by a page, or if there's no page number, count the paragraphs so we know exactly where that came from. And your reader could look in the references to find the exact document and then count down the paragraphs to find the exact text that we're looking for. Now, this suggests a certain layout: introduction, thesis, statement, supporting paragraphs, and a conclusion. And I would absolutely have a section that's labeled conclusion or a paragraph that starts in conclusion. But what you should not have is a heading that says introduction, because that is normally not allowed in APA 7th edition. So there are a couple cases where you might have something of that ilk, but not in a paper of 2 to 3 pages of length, like this one. Okay, for reasons of time, I think we should be wrapping that up. But as you are doing the reading, think about that pairing, because you want to be mixing comments about European and American authors. And if you read one and you say, oh, hold on, this looks like it's a parallel or a contrasting thing to something else. So, Charles Wesley talking about hymnody and Rauschenbusch talking about the social meaning of the Lord's Prayer. That sounds like something where you could find a lot of commonalities to write about. So look for those parallels going into doing the reading rather than doing the reading and then looking at how to find things after the fact. If you go in actively looking for connections, that'll help you narrow down what to write about sooner rather than later. All right, let us review what we've looked at. So we started with a discussion about proofreading and looking for things that stood out as conspicuously incorrect or not specific to this particular assignment. And so we looked at the assignment from BIHO 432. We talked through how to divide this information from this large block of text into a separate preamble, leading instructions, specific bullet items for things to include, and how to read the rubric to get an idea of things that should be included to help get full credit. We also talked about how to identify primary sources through analysis and looking at the distance. Is this the original author writing about things? Is this someone writing about another author? Is this someone who hasn't read the originals writing about it to determine primary, secondary, or tertiary? We discussed some other ways of understanding it. And we also looked at the course readings and talked about the different things listed and how to understand how and why those were primary or secondary sources. We looked at some examples from the ACU Library online database for historical and systematic theology. And if you have any questions about finding those things, you can reach out to the library or to the Online Writing Center for help with how to cite and reference it. You may find yourself, if you're not sure of the exact format and the rules for that, going to APA Style Central, which is the OWL link down here. And if you are embarking on an extended research paper written over a period of weeks with many different sources, you might consider looking at the link in green, which is to Zotero, some citation software that is available for free. And for larger writing projects is really a lifesaver for keeping you sane and working efficiently and having a well-updated references section. So if you have any questions, you can always send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, or for more extensive assistance, sign up for either an email appointment where you upload a copy of your paper by the appointment time and we send you feedback generally within 24 hours, or a real-time Zoom appointment where you ask your questions and get your answers in real time. So again, feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. There's no charge for any of our services. And if you do have a question that's a little beyond the scope of that, we can help you find an appointment time to get the feedback you're looking for in a timely fashion. With that, that's the end of our webinar. Have a good night.